A conference is by definition about discussion and interaction. And you, the audience, are as much a part of this as any of the presentations. And the conversations that we'll all have today, not just with the speakers, but with each other, is what today's about. So I hope you find the day interesting and above all enjoyable, because all the scientific evidence shows is that learning is enhanced by enjoyment. There's a few bits of housekeeping to start off with. The lavatories are through the door on the right at the back, sort of down the corridor off where one of the food stations is, which is at the back, and there's a couple of places where food is being served down there. There aren't any anticipated fire alarms, so in the very, very unlikely event of a fire, please proceed out of the nearest exit, and there's one there, and there's one here, and there's one at the back. I've done my speech about mobile phones. Many thanks for the emphasis. And I'd like to thank everybody who's converted the concept of a conference into the reality of today. Especially I'd like to thank our sponsors, most importantly our leading sponsors, the University of Plymouth, the Cornish Mutual, PKF Francis Clark, for their imagination and vision in supporting us. And many thanks again for all our other sponsors, including the HDB, Mitchell Moores, and Dixon Smith, and also everybody who's helped in kind. And they can all be found. There's a page in the programme. They're all Devons. They're friends of Devon farming. So you should look at the page and appreciate the value of these sponsors, because the help is really important to us. The support from speakers and chairs has been brilliant. Talking here involves far more work than just turning up on the day. There's a great deal of preparation. We have sort of practice runs and things. So many thanks to all of them. And many thanks too to Lisa and her team at the Agricultural Association, who've really made this happen. And most of all to the extraordinary Mel Bradley, who's done an indefatigable job putting today together. Posh Nosh's catering, Stage Engage's technology are also essential to today, and many thanks to them, and many thanks to anybody else who's made this happen, who's got us this far, including everybody I've forgotten to say. And the format of today is exactly as before. We have 4 sessions, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, divided by opportunities to meet and talk, fueled by tea and coffee, and in one case, lunch. There's a programme on your chair. Please, and I mentioned this before, keep to time. With my able whipper in and others, we will be trying to make sure that we squeeze the maximum amount of time into the day. But on the other hand, please don't be frustrated by queues. They're not an inconvenience, but a place for constructive random encounters. The morning sessions will cover what we've termed the big picture and resilient arable rotations. The afternoon sessions cover livestock production, followed by a wider forward-looking discussion with audience engagement and exploring farm profitability, which is what today is really all about, and resilience. And all these sessions bring together good applied research with the practical, earthy experience of farmers. Participation is critical. So every session involves time for questions, other than my introduction. So you, the audience, can explore and interact. So do ask questions, even ones that feel stupid or obvious, because I think there's a thin line between the obvious and the deeply profound. A straightforward question often provides the chance to bring out the most interesting of points and some deep insights into the reality of the subject under discussion. But please avoid statements, however passionately felt and how good they make you feel. They don't encourage the flow of conversation, which is what we're about. And so ideally try to frame your views as pithy, short questions. And apologies if statements are cut short by chairs, or also I'd say if any unasked burning questions, and because time is limited, most of the speakers are here for most of the day, so ask them privately if you're cut short. Anyway, to introduce the first session on the big picture. The global backdrop to farming has been relevant to Devon farmers since the Devon County Agricultural Association was set up 150 years ago. It's fair to say that for more years than not, the years have been challenging and difficult for farming. The first event in 1872 took place in torrential rain and was virtually washed out. Nothing has changed. And even then, technology was changing farming fast. 1872 would be one of the last good years of Devon farming that century. Globalization was beginning. Steel ships with propellers could transport goods cheaply around the world, with refrigeration ships that were opening up British markets to meat production in Argentina, New Zealand, and Australia. And it's strange to think that exactly the same networks with very similar technology are now allowing growing economies in the developing world to drive demand for red meat, which is supporting beef prices. I wouldn't be enough a farmer if I didn't say this would be brilliant if costs of production were not rising rapidly as well. Also, at the same time, new railways were running across the newly opened up Canadian, American prairies and the Russian steppe. American settlers were breaking in fertile virgin soil and harvesting with efficient new horse-drawn binder reapers. And they could explore exporting their harvest through an interconnected world to Britain. And it's the same transport links and harvests heavy with GM corn that are helping depress arable prices today. The other thing we share with the late 19th century, when Britain was facing the chill winds of globalization and huge numbers of farming were leaving the industry, that the level of food production in the UK was not a political issue, not a big political issue. The last true famine in England was in 1623, and it was a long time ago even then. What is different now is that urban populations have expanded hugely. Farming is a much smaller part of the economy. So I'd like to say it's to be applauded that profitable farming and the discussion of it is in Minette Batters's excellent report, which needs to be read, and hopefully people will refer to it today. But the big change on the agenda is that we've become much more aware of the human impact on the environment, both the physical environment and the complex biological networks that support us all. The most visible, in contrast to food, where 1623 was the last major issue, the most visible environmental crisis of flooding in Devon was only a few weeks ago, and on the news in every home, and environmental issues like climate change occupy the headlines. So farmers are on the front line of all of these issues, and this is the backdrop against where producing food. So there's much to discuss. And we'll cover this in our first session. So to introduce our speakers and chair this session, I'd like to introduce Tamara Giltsoff. And I'm pleased to say she's described as a disruptor and an innovator. There's a few things that Devon farmers enjoy more than a piece of disruption. We call it spuddling in these parts. But more importantly, there's few things we need more than new ideas and innovation. And Tamara has experience of government, working as head of innovation at the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, and she's practical experience of starting businesses. And more frequently in the farming sector, working for the Soil Association, and most particularly for our sister organisation in Somerset, the Bath and West, organising Land Alive. So I'm really pleased to hand over to Tamara to start this first session. Thank you. Thank you.
Chief Spuddling Officer, perhaps my title should be. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It means I don't have to talk very much, but I just want to say it's a real honour to be here. Many of my heroes are in the room today and on this panel. I have to say, I generally love moderating a panel, but I'm quite nervous today. I have some eminent speakers and I've seen the density of their decks. and I'm going to have to keep them on time. Yes, so just a few seconds on the context of this talk. As Harry has said, this is about the big picture. We live in uncertain times where systemic risk is becoming more and more of the discussion out of government. And you may have seen the global biodiversity loss and ecosystems collapse and national security report that's just come out of DEFRA. If you haven't, have a look at it. That really sort of begins to set the context for the food system in the UK and the global food system. But as Albert Einstein said, as I discovered this morning, in the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity, and I genuinely believe that. Roll back to the days of COVID, many new businesses and business models evolved amidst a very challenging and difficult time. And so today's conversation, although will present some tough data and some very realistic context for the day, amongst that is really significant opportunity to evolve and seize the opportunities that these risks present us. So I ask you to sort of hold that in your heart for the day. So the objective of this talk is to set the context for the day, to lift the lid on some of Manette's excellent report, and to understand the drivers of change. And we have Professor Pete Falloon of the Met Office Science Lead, I need to put my glasses on, and Food Security. Martin Lyons, the CEO of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and Alan Lovell, the Chair of the Environment Agency. So we are going to have 15 minutes from each of our panellists, and then I'm going to interject with a question for each one of them that I'm going to find as you're speaking. That will take us around 50 minutes in, and then we'll go to audience Q&A for about 20 minutes. So yes, save your questions to then, unless you've got something really burning and you want to interject into my question. So over to you, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. As I was speaking earlier over coffee with Harriet Bell, actually, one of the things I hope we can do from the science world is come to conferences like these, not just to speak, but to listen and to better understand how the impacts of the work we're doing might land with you, what it might mean for you. And hopefully that will become clear why that's important as I go through the talk. I suspect I'm probably guilty of having the densest deck of slides, so I will try to keep to time. I'd like to talk to you really about the work that we've been doing supporting agri-food climate change adaptation, and particularly in the policy side of things. That is moving towards farming and practical application, but I think that's something we might cover in the panel discussion. So largely this is part of work that we're doing for DEFRA as part of what we call a climate service. It's not very fundamental research, it's applied research driven by DEFRA's questions, largely looking at food farming and the natural environment. I think really we've touched on this a little bit earlier, but actually the challenge really in adapting to the changing climate is set to me by three different angles really. One is that the reports that the Climate Change Committee has produced, on the one hand, are saying that climate change, particularly extreme events like the flooding, are some of the highest risk future shocks to the UK food system. At the same time saying overall the sector and indeed the policy environment isn't moving fast enough to get practical adaptation, real world adaptation happening to adapt to those risks and build resilience. But also actually new climate science, back in the very nuts and bolts climate projection science, is showing us that the risks we might see might be more unpredictable. Newer climate modelling is suggesting that things like these heavy rainfall events that cause flooding, we might see them clustered together, new rainfall records being broken in a number of years, and then big gaps with nothing like that, perhaps for years or decades, so more volatility. And of course, we're all aware of the impacts these have had, the heat, the record-breaking heat of 2022, which led to millions of premature house poultry deaths, impacts on the wider food chain and wider food supply chain, on refrigeration failures and so on. And then, of course, the wet 2024, which I think overall reduced wheat production by about a fifth. So, and probably costs, I think we're now looking at around about $1 billion. So really significant costs and impacts of these extreme and acute weather events. Just to set the context for what I meant really when I was saying we are working at the policy interface, this particular strand of work I'm mostly talking about has been delivered to DEFRA for about the last decade. It's really aimed at taking climate projections at the top there. We have a process of producing state-of-the-art tailored climate projections for the UK, which we're very lucky to have. But we then use those. What we're trying to do is use that state-of-the-art information to help DEFRA with policy decisions in climate change adaptation and influence the direction of policy. Largely what I mean there is the macro scale, the big scale climate adaptation policy. So it's things like the climate change risk assessments, the National Adaptation Programme, tracking how those things are moving ahead, which is itself a cyclical process. It's done about every 5 years. We're currently in the 4th cycle of doing that, and the risk assessment is due to be published, I think, in May. The next one, it's out for review. And is a joint effort really between the Climate Change Committee and the academic world, and then feeding into the government's own official reports. But also increasingly things like the UK Food Security Report, also required under Act of Parliament to be produced every 3 years, and that's historically been a document that's looked at different facets of the food system, but looking at historical trends and data and statistics. And we're trying to bring climate thinking, case studies, future climate thinking into that, and other areas of work. The other thing I'll also mention, as well as this work we do particularly for DEFRA around food and farming, we're also very involved with DEFRA's crop genetic improvement networks across the 5 different crop networks that they have, helping to inform crop breeding for resilience for the future. And the other final thing on this slide, we work a lot in partnership. Of course, the Met Office has expertise, deep expertise on weather and climate, but we rely on a lot of partnership work to bring in broader expertise. Something else I'll mention on the journey, really, moving that from the policy domain, and I'll give a few examples of this work. On the left-hand side, a lot of the work we're doing is understanding the weather hazards. What are the things that are going to impact food and farming? We're also then moving through to think about, okay, so how do we need to adapt? What does that tell us about the priorities, where and when and what we need to adapt and in what ways? Encouragingly, awareness of the work we've been doing has also seen some uptake and some projects with industry, including supermarkets, but also with the likes of the Duchy of Cornwall. So actually, we are on a journey of trying to bring some of this research closer to practice. So what does climate change look like for the UK? Taking from the latest climate projections we have for the UK, which were produced in 2018. We're currently in the process of redefining what we do for the next phase. But largely, the story for the middle of the century is one of seasonally warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. Not such a significant change in rainfall overall throughout the year, perhaps. But the most impactful thing we think, as I mentioned earlier, is the increase in extreme events, whether that is heavy rainfall events, very high temperatures and heat waves, longer periods of low rainfall and drought, and also the impacts, of course, of sea level rise combined with storm surge. What do those patterns look like across the UK, to give you a sense? So these are maps of the change on the left-hand side in temperature, darker red, higher temperature change. On the right-hand side, the seasonal changes in rainfall. So basically, it's showing us the south of the UK is likely to get hotter. By the 2050s, it's probably around about 2 degrees. Towards the end of the century, 3 degrees in the annual average, but significantly more seasonally and in the short-term events. And the wetter winters I mentioned are likely to be stronger up the north and the west of the country, whereas the south tends to see the strongest summer drying. So, okay, well, what do those changes in climate and weather, if you like, mean for the UK food system and for farming? Because, as I mentioned, the climate change risk assessment is still in review and in progress, I can only show you results from the third climate change risk assessment produced in 2021, I think it was. I really only want to make a few points here in that actually the very detailed text there are what we call different risk identifiers. They're distinct areas that we're looking at. And the risks and the opportunities, that's also one big point from this. It's not just about risk. There are opportunities from climate change, but they spread all the way from things like impacts on soils, seasonal soil moisture patterns, through the impacts on productivity, the impacts of extreme events, changing pest and disease patterns, but also looking more globally, impacts of course on overseas production regions, on imports, on food safety and security, opportunities for growing new and different crops in different ways. So really quite broad. The other thing I'll mention as well is the way that we rate these risks. What the different colours represent are what are called urgency scores, and they tell us what we need to be doing in the next 5 years. Most of these for food and farming are red or orange, which either means we need to be doing more adaptation or we need more evidence and more science to underpin really robust and effective decision making. This is just one example of the kind of analytical work I mentioned we've been doing, looking at taking those broad-scale climate projections of temperature and rainfall and other things to look, in this case, at a measure of cattle heat stress. It's combining together information on high temperatures and high humidity combined, which have a bigger impact on heat stress to livestock. And on the left-hand side is the picture for the present day, moving through the 2030s to 2050s on the right-hand side. The different colours are showing you how many events per year, or is it rather, I think it's actually, the number of events per year you would expect to experience where a heat stress event occurs. And as you'll see, the blue colours are telling us actually these events in the present day are relatively rare, but by the time we get through to the 2050s, particularly in the south and the east of the UK, we see a big increase in the occurrence, how many events we would see during the year. And this is a similar case actually if we look at some of the other measures of what we call agroclimate indicators for the 2050s. I've just put a selection of them here, but an overall picture is, for example, for wheat heat stress around anthesis, the very sensitive reproductive period. We see very few of these events in the present day. In parts of the south, they might be picking up at nearly once every other year in the extreme. We also see big increases in horticultural measures of drought, longer periods of 60-day drought in this particular case. And then, of course, the cool events, some of which are beneficial for agriculture, some of which are detrimental. But things like frost impacting horticulture, of course, will reduce as the climate gets warmer. And the cool periods needed for vernalisation of crops like wheat will also tend to reduce and shift. So we've produced a lot of these metrics, working closely with DEFRA and stakeholders, which we hope are giving a sense of some of the priorities in terms of adapting. And speaking about adapting to climate change, we've been working very closely with ADAS to look at effective practical farming measures, particularly what we're calling quick wins, things which are easy to do, likely to be relatively high effectiveness and relatively low cost, looking across the different climate hazards, different farm sectors, different locations regionally. This builds on over 100 very practical farming measures which previous work by ADAS produced. And this just gives you a very quick sense of some of the quick wins to respond to heat stress and drought and heavy rainfall and wet conditions. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail. I hope part of the story of hope actually here is that, and positivity, is actually a lot of these quick win measures are actually fairly straightforward management practices or changes in management, whether it be deeper rooting grassland species, shifting the kinds of crops, the timing of the cropping cycles and so on, thinking about flood contingency plans. It does leave the question of what we do about bigger projects, things that will require more money, more effort. So just to conclude, hopefully I've showed you that climate change can bring both opportunities and challenges to food and farming. I think it's really critical when we're thinking about adapting and building resilience. We don't just think about that in isolation. We think about the implications for net zero, for carbon. We think about what it might mean for water, for biodiversity, for ecosystems, for profitability, so on and so forth, with a multi-faceted lens at the win-wins and trade-offs and consequences. Really critically, I think, almost as I started out, the space I think that we need to move into is taking what we've learned at the science and policy interface and working across government, industry, academia and beyond to really help get some of these messages and get some of these practices into play in reality. And as I mentioned earlier, I think there are some other questions. If there are things that we can do, quick wins, which are relatively easy to implement, are cheaper, that's brilliant. But actually, what do we need to do to support picking up some of these bigger, more challenging things that might be needed to help us adapt? Thank you.
Before you go, so I was very struck by the fact that your analysis and your data is very macro, UK macro. Yeah. We have a global macro of which we are a part of because we're part of a global economy, the food system. We have a UK macro, which you've very much talked at, but we also have bioregions and regions. And so I'm interested in understanding from you, how do we better regionalise climate projections and the intersection with landscape and soil state of health and other biodiversity measures and kind of elements within a region?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, in the science sense, climate projections all come down from global models. We need global models to understand what's happening to the global atmosphere. And then what the UK climate projections do is downscale that. So we will run more detailed models over Europe, over the UK, and you can keep going down and down in those boxes for the long term. Most of them are around, I mean, there's a lot of stuff around 12-kilometre grid cells, which is quite big. There is data now at 2.2 kilometres or 2 kilometres roughly, which is much more detailed and has better representation of the extremes. I'd still argue, you wouldn't necessarily want to look at one of those 2.2 squares as representative of a bigger area. So it still begs the question of what does that mean locally? And I think there is significant work that needs to be done on that downscaling side of things. And I think actually that's a space where techniques like data sciences and AI can help actually, because you can use observations, use advanced techniques to actually do some of that work. It doesn't need necessarily all of the links and loops that are in very complex climate models. But actually, I think the other side of it is combining it with the data and information that's more granular on the ground. And I think that's what's really critical to some of this assessment work, understanding how you might spatially plan out some of these things and where they'd be most effective. Needs a combination of better climate data, but also bringing together all sorts of different sources of land and soil and, agricultural practices, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm super interested in picking up that theme as we shift over to Martin.
I'll take it. Right. Nobody fell down the back of the stage.
Don't do that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to come and talk. And I'm sort of picking up on Manette Batter's report. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm Martin Lyons. I farm in Cambridgeshire, but also the chief exec for the network, which is a membership-led organisation across the UK, free to join as well. Anyone with smartphones, hopefully that QR code works. Really encourage you to have a look at it. It takes you to the report. There is a shorter version as well if you want to skim it. But actually, I think it's really a great report and sort of I think it sort of sets us as an industry of facing many of the problems, but also within a report put out a lot of the solutions, and not just the actions that need taking, but also the pathway to actions and how across government those actions can come together. So why was there a review? Excuse me. So farming comes with been under strain. So Millet Batter was asked to come and do an independent review. This isn't a DEFRA review, it's independent. We just hope the DEFRA and the government wider pick it up. Currently, many farmers are not really profitable, and increasingly as our area-based payment structure has been taken away and public goods has come in, there's haves and have-nots. The structure and the rollout hasn't been smooth, and others haven't, some people haven't got involved in it or have been able to get into it. Food security keeps moving up the agenda, and what does that mean? What does that reality is? What is food security for the nation? What aren't we producing that we could produce, and what should we be producing? And sort of fit that back in. And also the role of farmers and farming in the rural economy. And also we've seen the policy transition from the area-based payments to public money for public goods in England, and the devolved nations are doing their own journey. So the report is focused on England, but it does look across the UK because so much is interlinked. We've sort of gone through the journey of removing an area-based payments and accelerated that journey to take them off, but the new stuff hasn't come in. And also, it's given us the opportunity to pay for our core costs. As farmers, as land managers, many of our core costs are maintaining the environment. And the Treasury can kind of understand that and value that in. But on the other side, the previous government's brought in free trades and other products that are coming in that are different standards to us. So we're kind of rewarded and moving our food and farming system one direction, while free trade and other things are kind of undermining it the other side. So for me, that's really quite a bit of a challenge. We've got to really sort of help farmers see where the journey is, and hopefully in the next few months we'll hear what the government sees as that 25-year vision of what role does food, farming and landscapes play. The really challenge bit is the profitability side of farming. Many farmers are not profitable on their own right, particularly when we take the area-based payments out, and particularly when we look at the volatility of markets, the impact of weathers, and the last few years has really exposed that to many. 30% of farms have recorded losses over the last few years. 50% earn less than a sort of a living wage compared with other household incomes. And the really challenging bit is it's the mid-performing farms that are actually delivering the most of our productivity and production. And they're the ones that are most at risk. They're not the real forward ones, and they're not at the bottom, but they've got so many mixed things going on. And even the forward, the top 5%, they don't stay profitable all the time. Other impacts are coming to them around weather and other things. So even if you're the real top end, you're not always right staying there. You drop back down to the middle, and there's a lot of shuffling back up and down. And through Minette's report, she's got a lot of data in there. It's really good bringing that together. And I say many businesses, many farmers have built their business model on that area-based payments. Many of our rental values, our contract farm agreements are all still embedded with that old system. We've got to kind of really accelerate that transition to valuing our landscape for the productivity of what it can do. And the volatile costs. Costs have gone up by 30% of inputs and outputs, but our output, our commodity bit hasn't. UK economy, the farming economy is only 0.6 of the economy, when it's only valued for the one main focus that it has been for many years. Farming is the language, it's about food production. Well, if we only value the part of food production, we were irrelevant in the UK, the Treasury in the UK economy, 6%, well, we'll just import it. But we're part of a £150 billion food system, and which there are ingredients that builds into. We're not valuing it in. But we're also not valuing the natural capital, the goods and services our landscape delivers for flooding, for soil health, for nature, for access and everything else. If we could stack all that together, we could be 15, 20% of the UK GDPs. We manage 70% of the landscape of the UK or of England, but it's only valued in the Treasury's mind is 0.6. So some of the key barriers is that policy. We haven't got certainty. We know ideas of what we want. Government needs to come out with what does the new SFI look like this year, next year and the year after. We need to plan our businesses in the long term. We have a weakening bargaining power with supply chains. We all work as individuals, the majority of us. We don't collectively, we're not very good at coming together and work as cooperatives or other opportunities. So we're like getting picked off, and we've got to really start coming together as an industry and as supply chains and producers and within landscapes. I think there's a real role of coming together within catchments and landscapes to deliver multifunctional landscapes so we get rewarded for everything we do. And of course, the rising costs, we can't control that. Other people, are driving those costs, global events, energy costs. So we're exposing our businesses to huge risks, from cost to weather, and we're going to have to farm back within our capacity of our landscape, cause less harm to the environment, to water, to landscapes, and be more resilient and profitable. We've got a huge skill shortages. We've focused so long on technology and output and yield and production, and not thought about land management and animal health and crop health and looking at the biological system. We're all starting to understand that we work with the soil up, not from the crop and feed it from the top down, or the animal with the inputs fed into it. So a whole new skill set is going to have to be learnt. A whole new support industry needs to come together. And she references that sort of, how do we have a standard advisory service that comes back to support farmers in delivering the national picture, but also the regional and local picture. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. And tax and tenancies, that's an interesting one. How do we value what we produce and the natural capital and everything? How do we have tax ways that actually support the farmers and the family farms, not the people extracting values out of it? One of the things you really covered was the soil health, and seeing soil as the real economic driver of society. I think it was really good seeing the nature reports come out a couple of weeks ago, saying the declining nature is going to hit the UK economy and the global economy, and it puts our food security at risk. It's really putting our landscapes and nature and our systems at the heart of delivery for the future. So we should shove it up in that treasury mindset and in number 11. And I think there was a really good point in there around the soil shot and nature, putting nature on the balance sheet, putting nature as an asset and value in it, making all corporates and industrial, all supply chains do mandatory TNFD nature reporting for finances. That will really drive the system in. If we've got a production system that's leaving harm in our landscapes, whether that's pollution or nutrients or stressed workforce, that needs to be added in onto the balance sheet. We shift what we see as our land, what we get from our land. This is really good at the explicit whole farm approach, looking at soil health, fertility, emissions and resilience. And that's not just resilience of our landscape, it's the resilience of us as people, as workforce, as farmers. I think that's actually really critical. For me, that whole farm approach, we cannot be paid to do bees, butterflies and nice things over there if as an industry we're polluting on this side or causing harm. We've got to bring it together and think about nutrient circular systems. How do we move the nutrients in the right place? How do we move the waste food in the right place so it's recycled back, get the nutrients back into our landscape? I think that's really going to be critical. Well, did I cover everything on there? The farmers carrying most of the risk. Everybody, everywhere, wants the farmer to do something else. But nobody's here to help us. Everyone's claiming we're some of the problems, and we are. I fully accept many farmers are not great. My journey down yesterday, I've passed a farmer up the road, not very far, put in muck or slurry out on his fields. And the neighbouring field was wet and it's heavy rain. Come on, it's kind of a bit daft can we doing these things. But a lot of the other risks are, we want more from you and we're going to have cheap food system. So all the profitability and risk is down on us as farmers. Contracts, fairer pricing, we need clear labelling systems, we need a brand UK, so actually we can promote what we do, the standards, and then limit imports not to those standards. And we look at export opportunities, but we can't push for the export if we're going to be undermined by imports, and better labelling regionality. And I think that's a huge opportunity. When I talk to suppliers and others that are focusing on the southwest production system, you're so integrated, so local, there's such connections together compared with like me in Cambridgeshire and East Anglia. And I think that brand Southwest and that brand UK or brand British farmer has a huge opportunities going forward. So the policy bits is create that food and farming partnership board. She wants to bring food, farmers and industry together. So we have a board that works with governments to drive agendas. Put food, farming and environment into trade policy. We can't undermine this by trade if it comes to things. We've got to feed people healthy food to get healthy outcomes. Cheap food delivers cheap outcomes and bad outcomes. And we've got to join it all up and make sure the trade department and the treasury departments work with DEFRA and not separately. Long-term national security strategy for farming, we will hear more about that hopefully later this year on that 25-year roadmap. And focusing on farm clusters, I think it's going to be absolutely critical, and it was mentioned in there, and we know there's a load of funding coming, to bring farmers together, working catchments, working clusters, peer-to-peer learning, equipment sharing, knowledge sharing, one-to-many advice, but also look at the economic opportunity, not just the produce you sell, but could you do flood mitigation? Could you do access to nature? What else in that catchment can you offer to society, to the market? And for me, it's about asset management of our natural capital that will drive our businesses forward when we value all of it. And we know water companies, we know private markets are bringing funding in for natural flood management, access to nature, and a whole load of other things. But they don't want to work with individual farmers and 20 or 30 farmers. They want to work with a group delivering value. So I think there's huge opportunity in that. That farmer and peer-to-peer learning, catchment scale deliveries can really deliver better outcomes. So investment, finance, future, improve access to affordable finance. We've increasingly seen finance models that are only going to be funding farms that are reducing carbon emissions and delivering better outcomes. They are going to have to do their reporting to the outcomes that it's delivering. So there's a join up that started to happen there. And we're also, many of us are needing to invest for the future. That might be a slurry store, that might be new machinery or new approaches to what we do. How do we have long-term finance models that reward us for better outcomes and better bits? Particularly as we see changing weather, investing in drainage and water management. A lot of our drainage systems are getting pretty tired, and it's not about exiting the water as fast as we can out of our landscapes. It's managing water to stay in our landscapes better, to soak in and be a resource as those peaks and troughs come through. Review tax rules. Minette wasn't allowed to do too much on that, but we've got to get the package right. We've got to get the support right. Support new entrants and systems. We're going to see a significant transition over the next few years as farmers decide to change models, come out. How do we make sure not just the biggest next door neighbour farmer gets that, we get new opportunities, new people. If you're thinking about backing off your farm and semi-retiring, can you bring a new entrant in to come and get a new opportunity? Could you stack enterprises in and people back into our landscape instead of just taking them out? Encouraging private finance. In our own farming system, we sell grains. The grain market, the maltster, the miller, the oilseed rape is paying us additional money now for regenerative actions. We're getting water companies wanting to fund. We've got B&G wanting to fund. So some things I can do as an individual farmer, to whoever you sell your stuff to, what else can they support you in delivering? That more regenerative systems, soil health, building, but also what else wants to happen in your landscape? Can you come together as groups and sort of collectively look at pitching and marketing that opportunity? We also touched on the SFI being an active farmer. I think we really need to define what a farmer is for the future. Is a farmer a food producer? So hands up, who believes the role of a farmer is food production? And those that may think it needs to be in a new defined way. So the majority of you think farming is about food production. So if you're a farmer that only does cut flowers, are you not a farmer for the future? If you're the farmer that does 10,000 acres of maize for anaerobic digestion or energy crop, are you not a farmer? I think we need to rethink what our farming system does. Food is always going to be important, but it's got to be part of the mix. And if you're in a landscape that's going to be regularly flooding or has lots of people to access nature, how do you monetize that and give that as an income stream? The food will maybe be a smaller part of what you do. And I think we need to think about that role and the taxation system that wraps around that of food, farming and benefits going forward. I say only 8% of farms are in the top performing. They bounce up and down. The biggest challenge is we're not all there. And we talk a good game, but actually most of us have got really challenging balance sheets and we're not admitting to the challenges we face in driving that forward. And we've got to come together. So do read the report. I think there's some really good things in there. There are some bits I would challenge. The SFI paying for food production, I don't think we should. The market needs to pay us a food fair price. She wants encouraging for paying for pulse production. Let's make the food system pay for the pulses that drive the market. Don't use public money. The Treasury will never stand it in the future. We need to really champion what we deliver to society and who pays and why. I think that was my last slide. Yeah. And then questions?
I have a question, yes, thank you. Bang on 15 minutes, thank you. Just coming back to this kind of regional context piece, I would love to hear a little bit more from you and how farmers might benefit from the regional differences in climate impacts. You and I had an interesting conversation about the very dry area that your farm is in versus the very wet area in the southwest and the livestock heavy area in the southwest. You've touched on water as an asset. So there's water infiltration at a soil level. There's also potential for water storage on landscapes, which is a kind of growing area. You also touched on collaborative business models, and I'm super interested in collaborative ownership. I'm doing some work on a farm-owned biorefinery network in Ireland, as example, and horticulture. So what are the particular opportunities for farmers in this region in response to these challenges, do you think?
I think we've all got to look at where are we in the landscape and how's the weather and the changes going to affect us. I'm in Cambridge. We're technically still in drought, I think. We've got some puddles, but not wet. Yeah, I come down this one, it's like, holy moly. But, I mean, Tom, you're just up the road in Peterborough. That's only, 15 miles? I think you're 10, or most time I look at your rain gauge, I can see his rain gauge on my thing. You'll be 10, 20 mil above us. We're 440 mil of rain. So I've got to think about my business, my landscape, and that's for each of us. What are the weather impacts? What's the water flow impact? What are the opportunities and the challenges that are coming down the road? Producing more and farming right against watercourses at flooding lots. It's about soil health, holding the water, storing the water in our soil and our system, and slowing the flow out. If you've got slurry tanks, get some roofs on. Think about when you're going to be able to spread that manure or that slurry in the system you're getting. But also come together. Where can you share those nutrients? Where can you share production systems? Does everyone have to invest in the latest thing, or can you share some of it? But also come together in peer-to-peer learning. I think farm clusters is an absolutely amazing way to really drive good outcomes collectively. And we all take shared responsibility then and sort of ownership. But also as that money starts to flow in, they want conduits to put the funding through. So doing that together, but also look at the produce. If you're producing meat, it can one of you do a processing place, a butchery and farm shops. Not everybody has to do it. How do we have one farm shop in an area and we all put some products on the shelf? So I think that coming together to get best value, but also put people back in. As an arable farmer, I've got a 16-year-old lad who's got some sheep. We don't charge him for grazing, but he's grown his flock, and it's people back onto our farm giving us services. And that's what we can start thinking about. How do we drive our businesses and our communities and people together?
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm
Hello,
glad to say
over to you.
that I agree with a lot of that, which is a pretty good start. So I'm going to run through a quick response from our point of view to climate and to Minette's review. I'm also going to talk about a little bit about the white paper, which resulted from the Cunliffe report, primarily impacting water companies, and then just wrap up with a few thoughts. So first of all, climate, yes, we are all familiar with the challenges in this area. I was on the Somerset Levels on Friday, delighted that they are actually working as they should and not too much flooding. This storm caused, sadly, 285 homes to be flooded nationwide, 100 of them in Devon, in 40 different locations. So very disparate and very, very hard to deal with. But actually, we're proud of the outcome in that the extra defence is held, and generally what we have been trying to do over the last few years has made a difference. And it's not surprising, is it? So here's the rainfall for the southwest over the last 24 months, and as you all know, we had a terribly wet 2024, a very dry, not so much here but as in the rest of the country, but still very dry 2025. And of course, a wet end of the year. And January 26, I mean, somewhere around 200% of the average from 1991 to 2025. So, we all get it. This is really difficult conditions in which to be trying to farm. What do we do? And we put out our new national assessment at the beginning of last year. A lot of agricultural land is at threat. 59% of grade 1 land, of course, mostly in the east of England. These are pretty scary statistics. And I think the one point I would draw out is that the next spending review, I'm glad to say, is somewhat taking away from what has been the absolute priority so far, which has been protecting homes, to a more rounded view of the assets that need to be protected, and that will include farmland. So I think we won't see it immediately because our budgets are pretty chocked for the next 3 years. But in the later part of this of the next decade in particular, we will see more flood defence for farmland, and I hope that will be of benefit. And so these are the policy issues involved in that. I'll let you read those. I think that's all clear. And we work a lot with the NFU on rural flood resilience partnership. Lots of good stuff happening here with some key partners. I just want to stress really that this is a key part of what we are engaged on. We do care about the challenges that you face. And wow, it's certainly tough at the moment. We get it. Of course, climate change is part flood, and that's what we're worried about just at the moment. But most of our time, the greatest worry is of drought. And we are projecting at the moment a 5 billion litre a day shortfall for 2050. And to put that in context, we currently use about 14 billion. So it's a potential 1/3 risk. That's a scary number. We do have a way of dealing with it with investment in reservoirs and water transfer systems. You probably know there hasn't been a reservoir finished in this country since 1991. Shocking planning considering the growth in population and the changing climate over that period. Water companies are allowing too much leakage. They're working on it. They need to do more. And we need to manage demand from all parts of the community, including people. We need to be using less water and valuing it more. This is a great... Because what happens if we run out of water? It isn't going to be that people don't have anything to drink. It's users, including farmers, who will be at risk, and rivers themselves will be at risk because of over-abstraction. So this really is a joint effort requiring cooperation from all parts of society. And what can you do on that? What can we do to help you? Well, I think abstraction at the right times and you know, more when there's lots of water apart from anything else. We're spending a lot of time at the moment, particularly in the east of the country, trying to get away from the awful situation that we spend 4 months of the year trying to rush all the water out so that there isn't flood, and then for the remaining 8 months of the year wishing we hadn't because we need it. So clearly, abstraction under a more flexible licensing arrangement. So abstraction when there is water, storing it on-site reservoirs, so that at least you have a bit of backup to help yourselves. There's a lot going on in this space. We really favour water abstractor groups so that you can tell us where the greatest demand is, particularly in the east. Again, that's been a very cooperative area and one that we encourage. I think that's very important. I'll just leave you with those headings. And now, in soil, I'm not going to talk to this educated audience about soil, but I never miss an opportunity to say something about it, and I do want to pull out two things. One is that we are very pleased that we have been able to influence DEFRA to buy out the Cranfield map so that it will be available for all at, I think, free. I don't think they've completely decided that. But, you know, it's been tragic that Cranfield's had this great view of soil in the country, and it hasn't been generally available. That will be changing. And the second big thing here is soil is very complicated, as you know. What is it? 600 or 700 different classifications of soil. We've been working with DEFRA to simplify that down to 12 main categories, which people will be able to get their heads around. And we hope that working with that, we can really drive in all quarters how important this is and what a difference it can make. So onto the minutes review. I mean, we are very positive on this. There's lots in it that we think is very helpful. And Martin mentioned many of these points, and I won't dwell on them. But I think it's all good stuff. And some specifics. We know that we regulate proportionally. We are really trying hard on that. We don't always get it right, but certainly it's a key area. Water is key, soil's key, and I'm very glad to hear Martin talking about farm clusters. We think they're very important. Delighted that there is some committed funding to encourage farm clusters. The only trouble is, it's a bit like this. Good farmers come here, good farmers join the clusters. It's accessing some of the others that's more tricky. Then I wanted to talk briefly about the white paper, even though, of course, mostly on water companies. But, we're all in the same boat here, and getting them in good shape is also very important. And again, we are pretty positive about the proposals that are in the white paper. Most of it is creative and positive for the environment and therefore for agriculture. And there's one aspect I particularly want to draw on, which is the third one here. We would love to see more work being done on a regional and catchment basis so that your participation, along with the water companies and other impacts on the environment, are all taken together as in one package. I'm not sure the extent to which the government will back that at the moment. DEFRA do want to back it, but there's cost involved in it, and we may not get the Treasury over the line. But certainly in principle, I think that's a really important area. And then the last one, planning. As I said, no reservoirs, not enough thinking about what's water situation going to be like over the next 50, 100 years. That's what we should be doing more of. And happily, we are working very closely with Ofwat, the economic regulator. To be honest, most of what is recommended in the white paper, we are already doing. There's some good stuff going on here, which will help to the regulation of the water companies, but in a constructive way, so that they are doing good stuff for the environment at the same time. It's a 60-page white paper. One page of it is on farming, and I'm going to, where angels fear to tread and such like, I am going to talk a little bit about the difficult subject of pollution, which does cover one page of the report. But three, I think, very sensible solutions as far as we're concerned. We'll come on to the third one, which will be slightly more contentious. Sewage sludge, I think we all know, is a real problem. There is so much of it. The water companies do not have a solution to it at the moment, apart from spreading on land, and the land in some places can't take it. So this is a real worry. That needs to be properly permitted. And more controversial, we also think that cattle farming needs to be brought under the environmental permit regulations. And I'm going to just cover why. So first of all, this is some bad data, and I think we are going to get there with the water companies. The farming community needs to do more. And again, it's not you guys, I know, but the general performance is just not where it needs to be. So here's rather a shocking statistic. Of our inspections last year in the country, 49% were non-compliant for one reason or another. Now, some of that's relatively small issues, not having a nutrient management plan, not measuring soil. Small issues in the sense that it's not an immediate pollution risk, but equally vitally important to understanding what's going on and making a difference. That's the UK as a whole. The Southwest, I'm afraid the number was 61% non-compliant. And in terms of serious pollutions from agriculture, the total in 24-25, 77. Exactly the same number as was caused by the water industry. If you read the papers, you would not think that was the case. There is so much stuff about water industry problems, but it's as bad. And the Southwest, I'm sorry to say, southwest, I should say, Dorset and Somerset and west. 36 of those were in the southwest. That's more than Thames Water, and Thames Water is a shocker. This is not good. And of that 36, 28 were in the dairy sector. I know it's difficult. I know wet climate, difficult terrain, all that, but we've got to do something about it between us. And here's a key point on EPR. We do at the moment have under EPR intensive pig and poultry. Just look at the difference, 98% compliant, 2 serious incidents in 24-25. Whereas the non-permitted, much bigger obviously, but in percentage terms, 51% and 72. It really is overwhelming stuff. Is it all bad for you? I really, really don't think so. There is a bit of cost to attach to it, I admit, but there are also advantages. We know that regulation is very complicated at the moment, and it's generic. Much better in many ways to have something that's specific, which we've discussed with you, which actually focuses on the things that matter to you and to us, and we can reach a much more realistic agreement. So I actually think that it will work out to be a good thing, and we will reward with so-called earned recognition those of you who are doing well. I know that it's an area that people are worried about. I really, really don't think that you need to be. I think it will be, in the end, a good thing. So just to conclude quickly, I hope that I'm not wrong about this. I do think we are making some progress with water companies. The results aren't going to show it for a while for 2 reasons. One, we are doing a whole lot more with them, and our IT and their IT has advanced so much that we are finding more. So I think that we are going to see what looks like a declining trend for the next couple of years, sadly. But actually, the underlying performance is improving quite dramatically, and especially the massive increase in investment, more than double in this 5-year period than they have had previously. It will take a long time. We've underinvested in the water industry for at least 25 years. You could say ever since Victorian times. And you don't turn that around in 5 years. But I do think that they are on the way. So it's investment. We are inspecting much more. A lot of investment in IT and digital processing, drones, satellites, all that. A really good project led by Northumbrian with the great name of River Deep Mountain AI, in which South West Water are involved. And so lots more information coming out, I think will all be helpful. And then we're also our enforcement, where they've been bad, has been strengthened. So long time, won't see immediate impact, but we will get there. I'm feeling very positive about how we are doing with you in the agricultural sector, and I hope that you do identify with some of this. Really pleased with the spread of regen techniques. There's lots of good stuff. Really pleased with the focus and the awareness of the importance of soil, which has definitely increased markedly, even in my 3.5 years I'm there. Recognition of the need to reduce pollution. We can't go on like as we have been. Farm clusters I've already talked about. And some support for major landscape recovery projects. And I'm just going to give you one case study of the even load, which is in the upper reaches of the Thames, because I'm going there to launch a project which has been signed off by Natural England. 110 million of government funding over the next 10 years, working with farmers to make a difference to 3 key areas. There is some good money involved in this, and particularly if you get together to make worthwhile scale, then I hope you will find that there are some opportunities for you too. Quite a lot of investment going in. Advisors can help you to take full advantage of it, but certainly massive increase in elms. And SFI being reissued this summer, focus on small farms, which I think is a good thing to start with, but availability for others as well. So I hope you feel that the government has got the message. They are trying, apart from some of, needless to say, dreadful mistakes, but generally good progress. And I hope that we are getting there in a few areas, and together we can make a difference in what's such an important area.
Thank you. Great. Okay, we're going to go over to questions from the audience.
Okay.
So we've had a view on future weather impacts. We've had a view on the farm profitability review and the opportunities for farmers in this. And we've had quite a sobering view on the baseline, the state of nature and some of our infrastructure. So over to the audience. Can I just say, I really encourage people whose hands are sweating and who are the last person to ask a question to ask a question. And when you ask a question, please introduce yourself really briefly and ask a short question. Thank you. Over here, he had his hand up first. And then Harriet, over there, I think you had your hand up. Yeah.
This is a question for Alan. So I'm John Marmay-White and I farm on...
Oh, sorry, I should have said that.
My name is John Marmay-White and I farm on the River which is a small river about an hour from here. As part of a farm cluster, we have applied to South West Water's fantastic Nature Recovery Fund that they've called it. Is there a reason why South West Water fines have been handed back to South West Water for South West Water to hand out and brand as their own Nature Recovery Fund, rather than the Environment Agency, you know where the problems are, giving out the funding themselves? Because we've applied for it because the cash is there and we think we should use it, but there's quite a moral dilemma in pushing this fantastic South West Water do-good project that's actually their fine money.
Well, I mean, the first thing is it's a tremendous advantage and really important that we do go down that route of what we call enforcement undertakings as opposed to being a fine, because the fine money goes straight to the Treasury, whereas at least the enforcement undertaking cash is used for the purpose for which we would all like it to be used. So you know, in essence, that the system is good, I think. You were asking, are they getting too much credit for it? Because yeah, I mean, there is a case for that. But in a way, you know, I'd rather they were doing that and working with you. I mean, is it happening?
The expression of interest is at the end of January, so we'll find out.
Right. I mean, let me know if I'm happy to have a word with them. But you know, they are, and no doubt they will be overwhelmed with applications. So, and that will be a challenge. But equally, they are going to have a bit of enforcement undertaking money. I mean, I must say, I wouldn't bother too much that it is labelled under them. I think, in a way, that just encourages them to get on, reach agreements of this sort, instead of it being dragged through the courts. And if they are getting a bit of benefit along the way, let's not worry too much about it, would be my answer.
I suppose if we're successful, we can be very honest about where it actually came from once the money's in our bank.
I think that would be fair too.
Harriet.
Harriet from Riverford Organic Farmers. I'm really sorry, Alan. I think we're all picking on you.
That's fine. Surprise, surprise. Go for it.
Shall we go, guys?
You mentioned in your presentation that 59% of Grade 1 agricultural land has been recognised by your work as most at risk in the future. And yet, if we look at other government reports, such as the Land Use Framework consultation, we can see that the government prioritises Grade 4, Grade 3, sometimes even Grade 2 areas, such as quite a lot of Devon, for rewilding on the basis that it's not Grade 1 agricultural land. And I was wondering, are you kind of lobbying for perhaps a more sensible approach based on the kind of data that Pete and his colleagues are producing when it comes to looking at kind of which parts of the country are going to be more resilient for future food production, as opposed to relying on the kind of historical land use classification system or historical crop records?
The short answer is yes, I agree with you. You know, at the moment, as you know, a very large proportion of our vegetables in particular are produced on that Grade 1 land, and we need to defend that land in the interim. But equally, are we going to be able to do that together for all time? I think realistically, no, we're not, and we need to have an alternative. And that does mean taking more advantage of Grade 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 land. So I think in general that will be the direction of travel. I don't think it's where there's going to be significant investment in the short term, but I completely take the point, yes. Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah, just hopefully the land use framework comes out possibly next month, which would be good to see. But I think it's some of the grade 1 land is the most at risk from flooding and everything else. And we can't just shore that up. We've got to put food, especially veg production, back into our communities, into our landscape. We can't just go and put it all into 1 or 2 fields that are all grade 1 and then make a desert everywhere else. We've got to do the whole thing together. And for me, it's about making sure we've got the right production in the right place and the infrastructure to distribute the production.
Thank you. Andy, at the back.
Hello, Andy Gray, Devon County Agricultural Association. Alan, again, I'm afraid. How much does the EA spend on concrete-based solutions and how much on natural flood management? And is that formula correct, do you think, bearing in mind the stacked and multiple benefits that NFM brings to a landscape?
It's a good question. We try really hard to adopt natural flood management and indeed all nature-based solutions wherever we can. We also have to comply with the law, inconveniently. And there is no doubt that there are occasions where concrete can deliver certainty of a result by X date, whereas natural flood management will deliver probability of a result by a somewhat later date. And that can be in conflict. And we are constantly worried about being taken to judicial review by well-meaning ENGOs who are very anxious that we are not doing things that comply with the law. So, difficult balance. We do try very hard. Increasingly, we are trying. As far as I'm concerned, absolutely vital that we should. The only thing I would say, where we can't avoid concrete, then we are trying very hard to use low-carbon concrete and to do it in as least damaging a way as possible. But the sense I agree with completely.
The next 2 questions need to be for these 2, please. Lady in the front.
Mary.
Hi, Mary Quick from Newton St Sirs. So question for everybody, may I?
Yes.
So everybody spoke about the how important it is to have the policy and the science and the extension, the advisory and the practitioners, the farmers and others in the industry all working. Now, those networks were all broken in the 1980s with when it was public, when Margaret Thatcher came in and put the boot into ADAS, etc., and advisory. Not that we want to restore that, but how do we restore what is essential? Because, the farmers in general want to do the right thing, but if you like, the only much of the advice we're getting is from people who have an interest in selling you stuff.
Very good question. Who wants to go first?
I'll chip in. So it's good that the DEFRA have announced £30 million for peer-to-peer knowledge exchange farm clusters. It's £10 million a year. It's a drop in the ocean, but it's something. And it's kind of, they're shutting one scheme, but haven't got the next one going. So the facilitation fund is, so there's recognition. And as actually I've seen across the country, many private funders also funding the facilitator. So it's, bringing stuff together. So I think we are not going down to an advisor going out every single drive like it was post-war, giving an instruction to produce more. So it's that peer-to-peer, farm clusters, one-to-many, and work in a catchment and an approach of something together, which we've got to really all come together. And I think we've got so many bodies out there that are offering, somehow convening that locally to get the best value out of what we're doing, because we see so much competitive for funding to get another advisor in a landscape. We've got so many, we need to get them in the same spaces.
Yeah, I think definitely, as I was pointing at in the presentation, it's something actually I've had in my sights for quite a while, given the remit of the work we do, and that's where it's funded. But we are having an ongoing conversation, have been for some time, with DEFRA about the extension into advice and industry. A couple of things I mentioned. One is, you mentioned ADAS, and actually as part of the work that they did do a very broad brush look at the main environment and land management schemes and whether they were pointing the right direction for climate adaptation. We're happy to say mostly that was the case. It varies a bit. We're also now, I mean, Alan and I were just mentioning part of the changes in the Met Office building in Exeter is that we now have, as well as the Environment Agency staff in the Joint Flood Forecasting Centre, we have broader EA staff, DEFRA, Natural England, RPA. So we're building links with catchment sensitive farming. And for example, we are considering two-way training from them to help the climate scientists with understanding the agricultural context more deeply and vice versa, so that their advisors could have climate change training. And there will probably be more in that space. I'm not exact, but we're looking at how we can work materially together. And I think we're also trying to work to get some of this material out here, not just through me coming and talking and my colleagues and dear friends, but a lot of the research we've produced over those 10 years has stayed between Met Office and DEFRA. More and more of it's coming out on their research pages. That's an ongoing effort. We are also trying to synthesise and boil this down with a wonderful, actually, an MSc student from Exeter who's trying to pull together a synthesis report for us, Jess Bocking. So, yeah, we're on the journey. I think the other piece of the puzzle I've mentioned, we were looking very much for that official, if you like, what is the official, someone mentioned before, a standard advisory service, you know, and recognising what you said, having worked at Rothamsted Research before Met Office and worked a lot with the old ADAS and MAF, that's in our mind, but we also want to work with the likes of Nature Friendly Farming, you know, network and these much broader groups with roots into farming as well.
I'm going to move on really quickly.
I've got to answer this quickly because the lady who asked it. We do try very, very hard to be advice-led, as you know. I'm conscious that that isn't always as useful as it might be. It's a little worse at the moment because the number of our inspections have ramped up markedly over the last few years, and that means there are a lot of people learning the job. But on the other hand, when it's done well, it is really, really pleasing to see. And I was out yesterday on a certain dairy farm, not too far away from here, Mary. That's why I need to answer this question. With an immensely well-informed inspector of ours who's been doing it for 30 years and was so helpful, and with a young farmer who was simply lapping it up, taking notes, and will make a difference. And seeing Jane and our inspector working together was, made my heart sing. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back.
Edward Gallier, we farm in Dorset. Question for Peter. Where should we book our next holiday to get a look at what climate conditions farming might look like in the 2050s?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, we used to say something a bit like maybe Madeira, but it's difficult because we obviously don't have the soils that, you know, some and Mediterranean regions have. But yeah, that's probably the kind, you know, it's drier in the summer, it's a bit wetter in the winter, a bit more seasonal and more extremes. But it's quite hard. Actually, sort of the joking aside, we do use those sorts of techniques to look at two questions. One is, as the climate's shifting, where might we grow? How might the suitable, you know, regions across the country or globally shift? Where might become suitable now or in the future? And therefore, you know, effectively also to ask the questions, well, okay, you know, if it does get too hot and dry to grow wheat in a particular area or something, what maps across now to the future climate of the south of the UK? Those sorts of questions. You do actually, of course, find, you know, that there are areas in the States, areas in sort of Central Europe and things where the climate's quite markedly different. But of course, they have adapted what they grow there and how they go about it to those conditions.
I just add to that because I've just done some work with Soil Association Exchange in Spain. So it's also worth what's happening in other countries, where are the impacts that they're feeling, and how might we benefit from that, or how might we need to think about protecting ourselves. So horticulture is a good example of that. We rely heavily on Spain as the fruit and veg basket of Europe. But huge issues with lack of water in that country. So sort of going back to the opportunities, what are the opportunities do we see emerging where other countries are experiencing climate impacts and may not be able to deliver? Olive oil is a good example. I think there are now 6 olive growers in the UK.
I might actually just quickly, if I might,
Yeah.
really quickly, that actually it's really relevant. So one of the reports that is in public domain, alongside some of the stuff on adaptation and livestock heat stress, is one looking at climate risks to Spain and production regions. And part of the work that I haven't covered here, because we're talking about, mainly the UK and Southwest, is we have that focus as well through DEFRA. So we've looked at Spain, Italy, Morocco, and are starting to look at concurrent risks. What might we see drought impacting some of those regions at the same time that tend to provide us with similar crops and products?
We've got 2 minutes left. There was a lady who put her hand up here before the gentleman in his blue, but perhaps we'll take the 2 questions, the lady at the front and then the man in the blue, at the same time, and then we'll have like 30 seconds and I'm going to choose randomly out of the 3 who answers it. Okay, let's see if this works. Brace yourself.
Hi, Sabine McEwen from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. I'm wondering, so this is very interesting,
Quick question.
very scary, with the permitting for livestock farming, but is that an opportunity to look into systems of processing slurry so that the N stays on the farm, the P gets exported, but that individual farmers can't solve that? We'll have to work together, but this would be a good opportunity to do that because that whole shifting phosphorus out of livestock regions will also be part of permitting. So something to talk about.
And really quickly at the back, and then we'll take those 2 together and I'm going to choose one of you.
Hi there. I'll keep it really quick. Peter Green, Cornish beef farmer, host of the Farming Focus podcast. We've heard a lot about the issues and the solutions. That's fantastic. What I'm really interested in is how we make this happen, and particularly driving change. How do we get farmers, Alan spoke about the good farmers doing the change, but how do we get the rest of the gang along? So how do we make change happen?
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Okay, so slurry, how do we get the gang along? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Martin.
We need whole farm nutrient management plans, make sure we have an economic model of moving nutrients around, and maybe need to move animals because we've got too many nutrients where the animals are, basically. And on change, we've all got to lean into it and work with it. And we have to have earned recognition that if you're involved in stuff, turning up to events, maybe you don't get the inspections. And if you try to drive the change. I'll give you a thing. Round our way, we have health and safety used to visit occasionally. You're scary, you'd hide all your stuff you don't want them to see. Now we get a letter saying every year or 2, saying, come to our event. We look forward to seeing you at our event, but if you don't come, we look forward to seeing you on your farm. Everybody goes. How do we change the mentality of what we need to do?
That's called behavioural economics. Thank you so much, fellows.